I will just tell you that if I could actually get these four people in a room, I would mostly just pour them a glass of wine and let them talk. Right? Every single one of them has incredibly interesting things to say. I worked with all of them at different times, and I love the work that they do. And so, for the most part, I am going to try and just stay out of the way and let them talk. If we could just go forward a slide, please. So today I've asked our presenters, who all have different areas of expertise, to do their own introduction and to bring to the conversation one number which indicates to them their big concern with where we are in the patient safety crisis in the GLP-1 space today. So I'd like to go ahead. I'm going to role model this and introduce myself and my numbers. So if you could go forward a slide, please. So I am the executive director of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. We are a US-based not-for-profit focused on the threat of counterfeit and substandard medicines to Americans. And my indicator, my number today is 40. Go ahead and show the next slide. 40 is the number of additional medicines in this space in the pipeline, which means that we've seen maybe 4 today in most countries that have been approved, and there's 40 more potential medicines in the pipeline. That means that whatever we're seeing today in the area of GLP-1 fraud and other patient safety endangerment events, we're going to see it for a long time and multiplied very much more so as the market becomes more complex and as patients no longer are able to tell what is and is not an approved weight loss or diabetes injectable medicine. Next slide, please. For my part, the Partnership for Safe Medicines studies a lot of different aspects of the safety issue, the patient safety issue, and the illegal supply chain of medicines that makes their way to Americans. And what we've been studying this year is shipments. Thankful to some transparency from our Food and Drug Administration, we can actually see shipments of medicines as they enter the US. And we can't see where they're going to without special law enforcement access, but we can see the manifests that show where they're made as declared in the manifest. And what we're seeing is a flood of medicines made in both clearly unauthorized and unregistered facilities with our Food and Drug Administration, which makes them both illegal and unsafe, but also completely unbelievable lies on manifests. And so as an example, here's a gym in Canada, which was put down as the manufacturer of a shipment of semaglutide that was shipped into the US. And because of the overwhelming amount of packages, this is actually completely was let through. And as you can imagine, for anybody who has a familiarity with the difficulties and challenges and the lengths that legitimate manufacturers go to, a gym is probably the last place you would ever want to manufacture a sterile injectable medicine. And yet the criminals thought that this was so poorly scrutinized that that's what they put on the manifest. We've actually seen a ton of both finished products and API products for compounding in the GLP-1 space that have made it into the US despite the manifest clearly showing that they were made in a facility that is not registered with the FDA, and those products should have been stopped, but they were not. So this is part of what we're studying. We call it the Fishy Freight Report. PSM's research team continues to look at this and then feed the information from these as appropriate to law enforcement and to brand protection teams. And so that is what I'm bringing to the conversation. As we move through each of these speakers, I'm going to ask you to think of your questions and throw them in the chat. And as we get through the agenda and get through what everybody has to present and their indicators, we will start to go after them. So let's go ahead and start with Oksana. Why don't you flip the slide, Sophie, and we'll start with the next one. Thank you. Oksana, would you introduce yourself and start in?
Thank you very much, Shabbir. So I'm Oksana Pyzik, and I'm an associate professor at the UCL School of Pharmacy. I'm also the academic chair of the Fight the Fakes Alliance and founder of UCL Fight the Fakes, which is an academic chapter of the wider alliance that also leverages our very talented students as champions for the messaging on Fight the Fakes. And my indicator today is actually 10,000. And this is probably an underestimate. But so far, this is the number of non-compliant weight loss adverts that have been flagged by the ASA in just 5 months of this year. And we know that as this continues, that number is going to go up and up and up. And part of the reason for why there are so many adverts in the first place is because this is a product that has unprecedented public demand. If we look at the GLP-1 specifically, because that is one area where we have seen just one type of pharmaceutical product where this problem, and we'll be looking at it in more detail with all of our other speakers, but the concentration of adverts have actually been around the GLP-1 type weight loss medicines. And there's huge commercial incentives, particularly for online pharmacies. And it is operating in a social media ecosystem that rewards rapid, high engagement with health content, regardless of whether it's accurate or not. So digital advertising today is algorithmically amplified and infinitely reproducible and can spread across platform in minutes long before a regulatory body can intervene. And so if we look at what are the reasons for the strong push, is because A, there's lots of commercial incentive, but B, there's actually huge public demand. And even politically, we see that the Labour government here in the UK has actually suggested that GLP-1s could be a solution for unemployment in the UK. So that certainly is driving the demand. And you see all sorts of people who are now pushing it onto platforms where it is legitimate and illegitimate. So if we think about these misleading advertisements that use similar visual cues, the same influencer strategies and persuasive language as legal online providers, it becomes very confusing for a consumer. Already we know that the public struggles to identify between what is a legitimate online pharmacy or a clinical service versus one that is illegitimate. Now that's becoming even more confusing. Even prescribers, even healthcare professionals struggle to differentiate sometimes. And so if we don't have companies upholding to the principles here in the UK, it is illegal to have direct to consumer advertising of any type of pharmaceutical product, and in Europe as well. Actually, the only two countries in the world where it is allowed is the US and New Zealand. So everywhere else, we're not supposed to be seeing that. And this confusion is not abstract. It directly increases the risk of patients being diverted to unsafe, unregulated, falsified products, especially when constraints or affordability barriers push people to look online. So this is why advertising standards play a crucial protective role. They maintain a clear boundary between a clinically governed healthcare service, where we know, A, we're getting a prescription, that the medical history of the patient will be reviewed, and that they are not going to automatically get GLP-1 at the end of that service. Any platform that does allow that is going to be operating illegally. And so therefore, when we have these aggressive advertising tactics, it starts to look very similar to the real thing. And the more that we do have these types of adverts and the more that they are glamorized, then we start to see this shift towards over medicalization around normal body weight and body concerns, encouraging people to pursue weight loss medication without proper clinical assessment, and undermines that relationship between clinical consultation and evidence-based prescribing. And it's going to be the most vulnerable groups who are then purchasing these products from either social media or gray markets. And we know that organized criminal groups have begun manufacturing falsified versions of these drugs, even ones that are not yet on the market, like retatrutide. Eli Lilly is producing that. And in the UK, there was a big bust by MHRA about them being sold before it's even come to market. And this was all, of course, within the black market. But this is all tied together because misleading ads create the confusion, the demand, and the digital pathways that allow these products to reach consumers. And it's fundamentally about maintaining safe prescribing pathways and upholding clinical standards online. So we do know what is allowed to advertise our services, that is perfectly fine. But the ASA has said that we should be banning phrases such as weight loss injection, weight loss pens, that there shouldn't be any pictures of the pens or vials on the websites, and that we need to close the loopholes where consultation ads effectively guarantee or funnel into a prescription. It's interesting to see that AI-based monitoring systems scanned 28 million ads last year and identified the majority of problematic content. MRTA is also using AI to detect this, but we also need to ensure that there are significant fines, that this isn't just viewed as the cost of doing business, and it needs to be mandated through compliance law, and these penalties need to be proportionate to the harm and the scale of profit. If we rely only on voluntary compliance, which is sort of the current standard with ASA, we see that online pharmacies ignore the rulings completely, will take the fine on board. As I said earlier, it will just be viewed as the cost of doing business. They will continue to email people, use misleading advertising, show pictures of the products, and also encourage people who are not clinically appropriate for this product to access it. So I think that's probably a good place to start, but I do think that the 10,000 ads flagged this year is a warning, not an anomaly. Until our regulatory tools match the realities of digital advertising, patients will remain exposed and legitimate healthcare providers undermined. And we do want the good actors, the online pharmacies that are providing services to people that need them, to be rewarded and not to be confused with those that are operating illegally. So I will hand it over back to Shabbir, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Oksana. I'm gonna take moderator privilege and ask one question, which is, it sounds like looking at the use of AI in detecting these and the surveys they know that the Advertising Standard Authority has done, that finding the non-compliant ads is not the problem.
Yes.
So what is the one thing that is not yet being done sufficiently or at all in your mind that we need to do to move the ball on patient safety? And does it need new legislation, or is it within our grasp already in terms of regulatory powers?
So I would say that there's 3 points that would need to occur to strengthen our response, right? We can find the ads. Problem is the ads don't come down. And for instance, we need where they are the platform providers, so social media platforms, to remove them. And we need law to mandate that they have to be taken down. Voluntary cooperation is no longer enough. And we see that because even when patients are harmed, even when patients are die, the same sellers remain active. And also we need verified digital pharmacy, government-backed trust mark that is widely recognized. We have some of this already. We've got VIPs in the US, and we've got the EU-wide logo, but like a pharmacy.com, it would be one way for everyone to be able to adhere to a safer and well-known route to get the correct clinical services, and strengthen coordination between the Advertising Standards Agency. They need to have regulatory power. Right now, it's just they are self-regulatory, and that needs to change. They need to actually have teeth to be able to address the advertising issues at hand. And I know our next speaker will go into more detail and provide some case studies about this, and work more closely with the MHRA and GPHC to protect patients from inappropriate information and inappropriate products.
Well, I love that you have pitched the ball to our next speaker, Anne. We are honored to have you here. Would you please introduce yourself and your indicator?
Thank you very much, Shabbir, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So my name is Anne Devaud. I am leading the Global Product Security Program within Novo Nordisk. And my figure today is 1.3 billion. Do you have any idea why? Because 1.3 billion represents the number of Ozempic views on TikTok, which is really a huge numbers. And weight loss has really become a game changer. And unfortunately, social media, but also marketplace and some websites are encouraging the demand and the traffic related to the GLP-1. By the way, it is super easy to order, to obtain, and to use such type of product wherever you are in the planet. And the major issue based on this increasing online offer are two from my perspective. The first one, as Oksana said, social media are promoting those illicit medicine as a kind of consumer goods. Of course they are not. They are illicit medicine which may put patient safety at risk. And the second main issue is, again, the patient safety. Why? Because patients don't know what they may inject, what is inside, and that's why it's also super important to work with quality and to develop testing methodology to understand and to show risk and evidence risk and base for patient safety. And I think it's also important to consider that as for any illicit trade, it's a matter of demand and offer. And by 2030, almost 2 billion people will suffer from diabetes and obesity or being overweight. And yet, only 9% of obesity patients will be able to get a treatment. So we can expect that we will have more and more issues online for patients who would like to get products. The next one, please. Shabbir, if you may. Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I came with a lot of pictures, but I think it's also important when we are delivering awareness to show what is at stake. And the first thing is that in order to fight and to prevent, we have really to collect information and data. And in order to do this, we are using two main sources of information. The first one is the information coming from patient complaint or healthcare professional. And the second source of information is, of course, authority, but also the proactive online monitoring that Novo Nordisk, but the other pharmaceutical company are doing. So we are monitoring online to better understand the issue and to move with takedown when those products are illicit. And if you have something to keep in mind is that based on this monitoring and data, we have identified 3 takeaways. The first one is the increasing diversity of those illicit products. And you can see that they are misleading ads. So now they are offering GLP-1 in gummies or in cookies, which is of course completely ridiculous. But the idea for those criminals is to offer or to patients some product for some patient who may be reluctant to inject something. So those new presentations are here to really create this trust. And the consequence of that is that those misleading ads change the patient brain, and then they consider that the benefit of those food supplement or stupid things are increased compared to the risks that they are taking. And if we are looking also about where people are ready to buy counterfeit, there is a recent study from the European UIPO, so Intellectual Property Right Organization, where almost 50% of the Gen Z generation in Europe is ready to buy counterfeit online if they are able to get less expensive products. So if we are doing this for medicine, it's really super frightening. And the third elements or the key takeaway that we get from those online is that organized crime now are also really navigating in the gray zone, meaning that they are not copying anymore our trademark or our logo. They are offering semaglutide product, no trademark, but of course the issue is the same for patient safety and even worse. We are managing now a situation where a patient in Belgium, this case is under investigation by the justice in Belgium because there are some suspicion that one woman in Belgium died following the injection of some semaglutide, most probably bought online. So again, it could be appear as a funny gummies or cookie, but it's not. And there are really some situations where patients may die following the injection of illicit products sold online. So it's really clear that we have a responsibility, and then social media and platform have also a responsibility on it. The next one, please. And again, because organized crime and counterfeiter purpose is to trick patients, now they are also starting to copy the logo of local health agency, Swissmedic, FDA, and even World Health Organization logo have been copied on those products sold online. And this case started with the reporting from a patient to our Switzerland affiliate. And of course, we have reported immediately to the local health agency because it's mandatory. And Swissmedic agency has raised this immediate alert about, the risk related to falsified and misleading GLP-1. So the conclusion of this is that first, patients are, of course, the first victim. The pharma company are victim, but the local health agency are also victim of impersonation and fake logo. And that's why it's super important to push and to develop awareness by the local health agency using information that we collect from our different channels. And again, coming back to quality, and I know that some of my colleagues are here, we also need to understand what is inside. And this case has been analyzed by our quality team in Denmark. And of course, there is no semaglutide in the patch. You cannot receive semaglutide through a patch. You have to inject. So we are also able to show, based on laboratory evidence, that this is really risky, but this is also a complete fraud using different elements. The next one, please. And because it's also important to remind what is really the final outcome and what is our priority. The priority is really to collect this information and to move from online to offline, because behind online offer, there are real counterfeiter, real organized crime network distributing those illicit products. And Europe is also now a target for the counterfeiter. Oksana, you mentioned the case in UK where those products were found in a warehouse, and part of those counterfeit products are not on the market already for Eli Lilly, but also for Novo Nordisk. So it's also a sign that Europe is not, again, outside this risk. And the second lesson learned is that it's super important to share information and actionable intelligence to authority, because we can fight alone. We have really to share information and to support authority as much as possible. So it means collaboration between pharma company and authority, collaboration between peers. Again, with Lilly, we are doing a lot of information collection and joint operation. And this is the best, I think, ways of working to have a deterrent action on those organized crime. Among the usual suspects, as we can say that China and Turkey, Poland is also affected with manufacturing of opioids, drugs, but also counterfeit and illicit medicine. So this is really a huge issue, and we have to work together on that. Thank you.
So let me ask this question, Anne, because you've set this up and Oksana previewed it. Oksana showed that there are social media platforms that are making money from advertising illegally available products, illegally manufactured products. You've shown that there's plenty of examples of these being the route for illegal manufacturing to be sold to unsuspecting consumers. Have we reached the point where it's time to levy fines and other sanctions against the social media platforms for not only allowing, but actually profiting from the sale of these illegal products?
Yeah, I think now it's time to really consider and to enforce the online space. Online space must be regulated, especially for medicine. And I would like just to give you an example of European law regulating online platform to increase safety, but also to increase accountability. This European legislation apply in 2024. And concretely, there are in this legislation two obligations, several, but I think two obligations, major one. The first, that platform, they have an obligation to moderate the content, to fight against various crimes, including counterfeit medicine. And for example, for marketplace, they have also an obligation to collect and verify the identity of the trader which is offering product on their marketplace. So as far as I know today, there are 10 cases or 10 action ongoing in order to increase this moderation. It has been launched by the Digital Service Act. And I know that, for example, Facebook and AliExpress are under scrutiny again with those actions. But of course, it's also important to engage the dialogue with the social media in those platforms, because it is better if they may also increase early moderation rather than for us to ask for takedown and then to move with fine. But there is a regulation in EU. I think we have to implement, and this is the role again of European authority to do it.
That is the watchword of the day, right? Like, what's the role of the social media platforms legally? What's their responsibility for regulating in this environment? We still have both Justins to get through. I just want to ask if others on the panel want to chime in to that topic before we move to Justin Macy. All right, Justin, would you introduce yourself, your indicator, and tell us a little bit about, especially for the non-Americans, what is the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy?
Absolutely. My name is Justin Macy. I'm a pharmacist and attorney by education, and I work for the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. That's the ultimately the group that helps represent at a combined level the state regulators across the U.S., as well as the provincial regulators of pharmacy practice in Canada. So unlike in many jurisdictions where the Medicines Agency may also regulate the practice of pharmacy, in the U.S. that's handled individually at the state level, and we operate to help bring them together in a collection of places. One way that comes together is in this number 95% here. And that number represents the number of illicit, illegal online pharmacies that we've found from reviewing a collection of websites over a 10-year period. 95% of the websites reviewed were operating illicitly. I can get the next slide, please. And now that's really important for a couple of reasons. One, we have a list of 43,000 on the not recommended list that we provide on our website, safe.pharmacy. We run the .pharmacy domain name. So as Oksana mentioned, anytime you see a .pharmacy at the end of a URL, you can know that entity has been accredited by us throughout that process. It's also important because the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacy has done some recent consumer research surveys within the US. And specific to GLP-1s, they know of the survey population, 10% of all online, of all of those reviewed, of Americans there, were buying GLP-1s online. So the demand is really high, and the specific demand for GLP-1s being sold online is really high. I'm not just going to talk about online, though, as we have up to this point. I think everyone realizes that this is a Wild West area. I think it's also important to talk about where we're seeing these products in other places in the supply chain. So if I get that next slide, please. Here we have a collection of illegitimate products that were found within the U.S. supply chain, actually in pharmacies. There's a case that occurred in conjunction between a few states, but ultimately the state of Arkansas is the one that bubbled this up the most. In this instance, the products were found in white. Essentially, a distributor that was selling them out of a different state had been caught in this instance. And if I could get that next slide, please. This is actually a good story here because we've developed a methodology by which any pharmacy or any pharmacy regulator can scan the data matrix code on a product within the US and get a response back as to whether or not the product identifiers on that are legitimate, as well as whether or not the manufacturer knows something specific about that serial number. In this case, the manufacturer had already been involved in the investigation from one state and could respond to another state explaining, yes, we're seeing this. In this case, Novo Nordisk, I also believe Lilly as well, were both involved in this investigation in this case and ended up taking action to remove a very unusual medical gas license that actually existed to the distributor in the other state. So this is an example of the legitimate supply chain working. It doesn't mean that it's impenetrable, but it does mean it has actual mechanisms to be able to pull that data, pull those products out of the supply chain as they're caught. And then for the next slide, I'll talk about one other different supply or vector we're seeing these products come through. Historically, you have a collection of websites called research chemical websites or peptide websites. Those websites historically were tailored towards bodybuilders. You kind of had to know what you were doing, and then you were buying things to supplement or augment your steroid therapy. For those reasons, while there was some enforcement, you didn't see a lot of enforcement because to some degree, you were worried about victims who maybe didn't know what they were doing was wrong or problematic and were kind of being spoofed or scammed in the process. However, with the rise of GLP-1s and with the rise specifically of shortages of GLP-1s initially after the weight loss indications, causing additional compounding, consumers went to these research peptide websites and bought them as if they were the approved drug, as if they were a legitimately made compounded drug. And for those reasons, you're actually seeing them totally go mainstream. So these research chemical websites that historically were kind of a niche market are now very clearly consumer focused overall. And you're seeing a lot more focus on that as a result across the board. This is what I would say, totally illegitimate product outside of the supply chain. You are seeing these products, though, penetrate the legitimate healthcare stream because they're actually being purchased by med spas and other non-traditional dispensers and then re-administered or dispensed from those practitioners directly to patients in that last mile. So a huge problem. I'm happy to talk more about it if there's any questions.
Let me actually ask you this question, Justin, because I think this is a new phenomenon. I actually was surprised when we as a civilization moved from across the Rubicon of I'm going to buy random chemicals on the internet that are marked research use and not for human use and inject them. But we appear to be there. Don't understand how we got here. But for people who have not given this a lot of thought or who don't have a medical background, what is the danger of injecting research-only chemicals into your body?
Yeah, so I think twofolds. First, it's important to distinguish why they're being called research chemicals. And ultimately, that's because in the vast majority of medicines agency statutes in the US, the FDA, MHRA, any of those statutes, they're all regulating the drugs, not based on the bottle and the thing in it usually. They're usually regulating it based on the whole packaging and the intended use of the product. And so when someone markets it as research use or not for human consumption, the idea is they think they're taking advantage of a loophole that suggests these aren't drugs and therefore can't be regulated. The reality is in every jurisdiction I've done any work on and looked at, the intended use is determined by the full set of actions of the person putting them into commerce, not merely the disclaimer being placed on them. So long as they have comments that say things like, this helped my rat lose a whole lot of weight, they're not clearly for research purposes. And so that's the first reason this market exists. As far as the dangers go, which I think is critical to also understand, is these are completely unregulated. Who knows what they'll do or what they contain or what products that are there? Who knows if somebody makes a mistake when they're mixing this up in a bathtub somewhere and causing someone else to have a problem with it? When we talk about compounding, there's already, and I've seen a few questions about that and in the chat. When we talk about that, there's a collection of regulation around that, which at times has not been sufficient, right? There are reasons why we prefer commercially available products over compounded products. There is additional risk with compounded products. These are even lower substandard than that. There's no regulation around them whatsoever. You're literally buying and hoping that something terrible doesn't happen, like an infection that could be pretty significant, especially if you're injecting.
Thank you, Justin. And we will come back to compounding in the main Q&A. What's interesting, of course, is that our last speaker, Justin Presant, has actually got some things to say about compounding. If you would introduce yourself and your indicator and give us a little bit of a brief there.
Yeah, thanks, Shabbir. It's always hard to go last because so many good points have been made already by the other panelists, but good to be with you. I'm Justin Present. I'm an in-house lawyer at Lilly working on special investigations, which include things like the topic we're talking about here today, the sale of various knockoff products and the ways in which the sale of those products and distribution of them and the precursors that go into them can really have a negative impact on the public, patients, and the legitimate actors in the industry too. So we went with a nice round number, 0. And the reason we went with 0, if we can go to the next slide, is it's the amount of active ingredient, tirzepatide, that we give to others to put into products, which is to say we don't do it at all. And most of the audience probably knows that tirzepatide is the active ingredient in our products Mounjaro and Zepbound. And so any other purported tirzepatide being sold, and there are so many different varieties, they're the research use only, in air quotes, products Justin was just talking about, products being advertised by med spas or so-called wellness clinics, other online sales, mass compounders. None of that tirzepatide came from Lilly. And as Justin was just indicating, stealing my thunder a little bit, but the questions that come along with that are too many to name. But just to identify a few, the patient and the public don't know who made the tirzepatide. Was it ever tested? If it was tested, how was it tested? Is it contaminated? That could be chemical contamination or bacterial contamination. Were there any quality controls in place at all? Was it stored under proper conditions? Was there a secure supply chain? Was the manufacturing site where it was made? If we know, was it ever inspected? Is it even tirzepatide at all? And those questions are unanswered for so many of the knockoff products that we see out there. And the last thing I'll add too is that's just, of course, the active ingredient we're talking about, and that's not the final product. Like as Justin said, our final product would be reviewed by the FDA and other regulators. When, just to talk about the research use only products, when those are sold online with a wink and a nod, and people are posting about the experiments they're doing on their rats, and they're selling it with a syringe and some bacteriostatic water, who knows what's in those other components that are going to be mixed with the active ingredient, and those components have the same questions and more that I just raised. So really unfathomable risks to patients being posed by all these different kinds of products.
Let me ask this question of you, Justin. You've described a lot of very patient endangering behavior that we all know in our gut is wrong. To make a buck, taking a shortcut, selling people a product that is not confirmed or verified to be safe or effective. How much of this behavior is already illegal? Like, how much do we have to do to secure patient safety that requires just more enforcement versus new legislation and new regulatory powers?
Yeah, it's a great question. The vast majority of the patient danger we're seeing already is illegal in some form in most jurisdictions, which is not to say that there isn't an opportunity to improve or refine the law in a lot of places. It's a big world. There are lots of different jurisdictions, but when it comes to these kinds of knockoffs, these unapproved, fake, falsified medicines, most jurisdictions are already going to have some laws against it. And in a lot of jurisdictions, there are going to be multiple laws against this kind of conduct. And both you and the other panelists have already talked about some of them, but just for example, in the United States, sales of these products could violate a number of criminal laws or civil laws. So we see things like everything from FDCA, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act violations, which is both civil and criminal prohibitions, to things like smuggling, where things are coming into the country with intentional concealment or other kinds of fraud. So there are a lot of laws on the books already, which is not to say we couldn't update some in some places, but most of it's going to be illegal.
Do the other panelists have perspective on that you want to share?
Yes, that even if there are laws, we need to ensure that it's being litigated and that the bad actors are being held to account, because it's one thing to pass new legislation, but it's another thing to follow through. I know some of our partners through Fight the Fakes also promote Medicrime as a convention that countries can sign up to. The UK has not yet, and this is an attempt to harmonize the legislation, but the next step is then to ensure that we have appropriate penalties that are significant. Currently, we still have the trade of heroin and other illicit substances having a longer criminal sentence than those for pharmaceutical products. And you could argue from an ethical and moral perspective that actually if someone is believing that they're getting a life-saving treatment, a cancer therapy, and they end up receiving significant harm, or worse, end up dying from it, it is not the same as someone who is knowing they're taking a significant risk by buying a street drug. And therefore, we need that to be reflected by the judiciary and for international cooperation. And so hopefully more countries will sign up for things like Medicrime so that those bad actors are disincentivized. It's a $200 billion industry, falsified pharmaceuticals. This is a lot of money, and that's why the organized criminal groups are setting up factories all over the world because they're the profits. And so we need to catch up and cooperate across all sectors, and that's what Fight the Fakes does best. We bring together experts from academia all the way through to pharma, to legal experts, to frontline healthcare professionals, to patients themselves who are the ultimate victims of this crime.
And you have a perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to collect evidence again, because those organized crime, they are involved in multiple crime, including counterfeit medicine, but also tax evasion, narcotics, as you said, and a lot of issue. And I think it's really super important that we are able to provide those evidence to the authority and to the prosecutor to obtain determined sentence. And fortunately, there are some few cases where we are able to get strong sentence. We had a recent court decision in Brazil where one organized crime has been sentenced to more than 7 years prison for dealing with counterfeit GLP-1. It was a long-term investigation, but I think we have also to communicate this and to encourage country best practices in legislation at a regional level as well. I think it's really having such type of case is also important to show how situation have to move on the right way.
Justin.
Yeah, I think that especially when we're talking about the legitimate supply chain who has these products at times, there's a big question about how do you implement that. And I say that because specifically online pharmacy, that's trickier to prosecute from a board of pharmacy perspective, say, or a provincial authority somewhere. They may not have the quite jurisdiction. There's enforcement issues there as a result. However, when you're talking about a med spa located in a state where that entity, where that board has direct kind of patient constituents, you'd expect them to be able to do a lot. There are some states who have full enforcement authority in those scenarios. There are varying other states where the state may either not have the authority at all, or the authority is very implied but not explicit, which makes it very difficult to avoid legal challenges to enforcing that authority. I can tell you that one state, for example, that's done a lot of investigation on med spas, Ohio, has just under about 500 full-on site reviews they've done during that time. About 1 in 10 ended up either at the time of the inspection or shortly thereafter no longer being a licensed facility. That's a pretty substantial change to at the last mile directly to patients. If we saw that in a scenario where someone was going to do inspections of doctors and 1 out of 10 doctors lost their license in it for cardiology, it would be a shocking scenario. Here we have that for entire specialized area of med spa and beauticians and estheticians. And so I think that's a great example of, because that state has that unique authority explicitly carved out in statute, they're able to do that. Other states don't have that authority and struggle to have that same level of enforcement as a result.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who is interested in what really great patient safety regulation looks like to read the Ohio Board of Pharmacy inspections. We actually echo them in PSM's weekly news. They are definitely a source of dark comedy. The amount of things that are not understood by med spa employees about how to safely acquire, store, and dispense prescription medications probably would make your hair curl for as much hair as you might have left. And it's really, really a role model example of how a regulator can really use their power to protect patients. I'd like to move on to the next question, unless we have more to say on this. And this is obviously a can of worms, but I'm going to ask everybody about this question that was put in the chat, which is what is being done around the compounding of these GLP-1s. There is obviously a legitimate role for compounding, right? We need it to make our drug supply resilient when there are different needs that patients have that are not met by commercial products. So, but I'm just going to go around the panel and ask you to chime in either with something that you've seen that is good patient and safety enhancing action, or someplace where you see a gap that you think needs to be addressed. And I'll let anyone go first. But I'll call on Justin Macy if no one else asks.
I'm happy to jump in. So yeah, you said it correctly. Compounding is an essential part of the healthcare system. It's important. Patient has a peanut allergy and there's no other choice, then sure, by all means, compound. If a drug is on shortage, we have a backstop for that via the compounding system. The problem that occurred in this scenario is that the shortage was a result of lack of the product being in demand, the increase in demand. And then after that, you saw this massive cottage industry where entire businesses were set up solely for the purposes of mass compounding. Now, that wasn't and on its own explicitly a problem. It met a need that was not being met by the commercial supply chain. However, once it ends, it ends. And the issue there is because these drugs are blockbuster drugs, you have entire businesses met around that. And so you're seeing a real market force that's being played out here. And a lot of that compounding, I would say, that is occurring now, maybe shouldn't be occurring at all. I don't think if you add a new ingredient that is unrelated at all to the product, it should be considered a valid compound unless it has a valid patient-specific medical need. But that's not what we're seeing occur across the compounders. Buying a drug for a cheaper price through compounding isn't a legitimate reason to do the compounding to begin with. So I think that's an existing issue, and it ultimately comes down to market economics as what's driving that market force.
Excellent. Other panelists, Justin.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, picking up where the first Justin left off, I think the so-called mass compounding or mass personalization, which sounds like an oxymoron, that there's the original intent behind the compounding statutes that's really being perverted into saying, well, there are millions of people who need, for example, B12 mixed with tirzepatide, and that's how we get away with so-called personalization. It's really not the intent behind the law and is contrary to the law just in the United States. And we see that happening not just in the United States, but around the world. And you asked for something positive that's been done. We recently saw in Brazil, just in the last couple of weeks, a large enforcement action. We talked about the large enforcement action by MHRA back in October. But in Brazil, we saw there was public reporting of the simultaneous execution of warrants at, I think it was 24 locations associated with a particular compounder that was violating the laws in that country. And I think that's the kind of enforcement that we need to see, that when compounding laws are being abused, whether it's in the United States or Brazil or other places, that law enforcement is and regulators are taking action to make sure that that those compounders are following the law.
And Oksana, any thoughts?
I have just one. I think just to be clear for the audience, for me there is an issue with this illicit compounding that first we get evidence that the quality of the product is not at stake because there are some high level of impurity, and there are external studies which have been confirmed this. And the second risk is again for patient safety, because as it is mass sales, patients are using it without the advice of a doctor, meaning that they are injecting themselves or they are mixing product and they have no clue about what it is, compared to, again, compounding, which is made for specific patient purpose, driven by a pharmacist. So under a clear regulation and with a good healthcare professional advice. When they are selling those products online and patients get it, they cannot really how to use it if there is any issue with the dosage and injection. So I think it's also important that it's not only a matter of product, it's also the way to administrate and the way to ensure that patients are using the right product with the right manner to do it.
Just to add on to that, I would say that we also need to ensure that prescribers are educated about who is doing the compounding in a up to standard, and to report anytime that they have a patient come in using a compounded product where there is a problem, because again, we need to maintain those high standards and that quality of care. There are going to be cases where compounded products from a legitimate pharmacy will be appropriate for a specific patient, and it's also in shortage situations. There's also an FDA allowance for that. However, again, the pharmacy profession needs to ensure that that is being done to the highest possible standard, sterility is maintained, and that prescribers know which pharmacies are maintaining that and who goes on to, let's say, the naughty list, and that appropriate action is then taken to shut them down or remove their ability to compound those products, because it damages pharmacy as a profession overall. So again, it's making sure those inspections happen and that there is education around prescribers to ensure that they know who they are working with. And I think that relationship from a healthcare perspective is very important. And this is not a solution that is appropriate for everybody. It's never going to be at mass scale. And those that end up having impurities or other substances that do not belong in that product also need to be then reported and those operations closed down.
That really leads us into another question that we have in the chat, which is, what are some studies? Because the Fight the Fakes community are data first patient safety public advocates. And so bringing that data, Oksana, we talked about the survey of the 10,000 illegal ads. Justin, you talked about the 95% of online pharmacies operating illegally. I'm just going to ask the panel for more and throw one in for myself, which is that one of my board members, who's a pharmacist, did a study of patient safety adverse events with branded GLP-1s and compounded GLP-1s, and found for the compounded products, as akin to our concern about them being necessary but at a lower level of safety, there were more adverse events, and those adverse events were more severe. Right. And he did this using the FDA's adverse events database. So it was an independent set of data. You can find that on our website at safemedicines.org. What other studies have you found in the last 2 years, let's say, that really guide your thinking on patient safety in this area? Anyone?
I can go if you want, Shabbir.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there was a recent FDA report, I think it was a 2024 report on pharmaceutical quality, where they looked at, in the last 5 years, various API manufacturing sites, going back to the issue of where is the active ingredient coming from, assuming the active ingredient is in the knockoff. And what they found in that study is 72% of API manufacturing sites that had adverse regulatory actions, such as a warning letter or an import alert, they were sites that were exclusively supplying compounding pharmacies, even though they represented only 18% of API manufacturers. And so what you see there is essentially those sites from overseas that are making the API and getting it into the countries where the demand is. Those are the ones that have disproportionate amounts of regulatory issues when the regulators are even able to look at them in some respect. And we know in a lot of cases there are API manufacturing sites, active ingredient manufacturing sites that are never inspected. So I think the FDA has pulled together a lot of useful data on that particular issue.
Well, and Justin, just to follow up to that, those manufacturers are not just selling to the United States, right? I mean, Fight the Fakes is a global network of patient safety advocates. That research really, those companies will be a patient safety threat to patients all over the world, not just in the US.
Oh, 100% agreed. And I was referring just to that FDA report, but I think if you look at customs data, you see, and there is publicly available customs data, that you see that the same manufacturers at those different sites, whether inspected or not, they're shipping all around the world. I mean, there are other reports. I think there's a report from the Brazilian government that looked at a 18-month period or 2-year period from the last couple of years and found that over 100 kilos of tirzepatide that was imported into Brazil. I don't know the scope of that study, but the scale sounds right to me. And you can do the dose calculation that you sometimes hear of, even with street drugs. And just for those 100 kilograms, it converts to something like 20 million doses that people that are now floating around that country, and who knows where they're going.
Yeah. Oksana, you mentioned a study in the chat. Would you like to bring it into the conversation?
Yes, so this one looked in particular about misleading advertising. And so we were just talking about compounding. So between July to September in 2024, an analysis of different websites selling compounded semaglutide, tirzepatide, or liraglutide, 13.9% didn't even disclose that the medications were actually compounded. So people did not know that they were receiving something that is different than what is provided from the pharmaceutical manufacturer itself. And that's every consumer should be informed about what type of product they are receiving. So that's certainly a huge issue. And they claimed that they were drugs that were FDA approved. They did not report harmful effects, warnings, precautions, or contraindications. And 40.5% claimed efficacy for something not in the label at all of the FDA approved branded drug. So misinformation, essentially. And so that then leads to a very confused population about not only what are they receiving, but what the potential harms could be. And now in the digital space, we see that health misinformation is only growing. We had some really fantastic examples from Anne about the case studies as a result of that. And so we have to do a lot more to ensure that people understand how to access medicines safely, that medicines require prescriptions, even that basic fact that you require a prescription to get a GLP-1 product. You'd be amazed to see that the vast majority of the population does not even know that. They see it as a cosmetic lifestyle type product, that they can get it off of any kind of social media site, and that would be acceptable. So we have a lot of work to do. Fight the Fakes can't do it alone. We need everyone who's on the call as well to do their part to ensure that that we protect patient safety, because that's ultimately what it's for, is to make sure everyone receives the help that they get and are not harmed by falsified products.
And I think you're going to have the last word.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think counterfeit is really a silent crime, and we have to speak up about it. And one way to do it is to increase society awareness, to also look about how to engage with influencer, how to ensure that people are aware about the risk, remain the key message, but it's patient safety matter, so it means that we have to do more on awareness. In any region, any channel, I think this is really one of the best solutions to protect. Thank you.
Well, we have hit an hour, which means we are out of time and still have 2 or 3 questions left. So I apologize we couldn't get to it all, but I want to thank our 4 panelists, Anne, Oksana, Justin, and Justin. It's been a pleasure to be your moderator today. Thank you for giving your time. And I'm going to turn it back over to if the panelists have some final thing to say. Otherwise, Sophie will have to take us out.
Just join and support Fight the Fakes, please. That's my final message.
Absolutely. It's Fight the Fakes week. It's a great week to join Fight the Fakes, to have your organization become a part of this global network. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. See you guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.